Everyone, I hope you are doing well. Today we are going to be talking about the characteristics of living things. And so when you think about characteristics of living things in a human, you might be thinking we eat, we sleep, we breathe, those types of things. So those are characteristics particular to a human. Some of them we do have in common with all living things, but not all of them. So today we're going to go over the 7 characteristics of living things that every living creature shares. So if it's a living thing at one point in time, it does these 7 things. So to first start off, I kind of want you all to think about these 4 images. So think about soil, plants, fire, and water. Think about whether they're alive, whether they're not alive. What would you say makes them alive, and what would you say makes them not alive? Vice versa. Think about that. Write it down in your notes or write it down somewhere. Just kind of ponder that and find what your definition of living is to start. So after you've done that, we're going to go into the actual 7 characteristics. So the first one is cellular organization. All living things are made up of cells. So that literally means every living thing, all living things have cells. So this could mean that you have one cell though. So there are things called eukaryotes that only have one cell. They're unicellular. They still count as living because they have cellular organization. They have some level of organization there. The next thing that all living things do is at some point in their life, they reproduce. Now, there are different kinds of reproduction that we will talk about more. There's asexual, which means it's what you see here on the slide. So you just see this organism splitting into 2 organisms. That means that it's splitting itself or cloning itself. That is a type of reproduction. Or there is the type of reproduction that animals do. So we know that animals need a male and a female to reproduce or have offspring. So both types of those are reproduction. They don't look anything near the same. One is cloning itself. You can have that different ways, and the other is sexual reproduction. So asexual and sexual there. However, the thing that is in common is all living things at one point in time do reproduce. Then the third characteristic is metabolism. What metabolism broken down is that you need energy. All living things need energy. So every living thing carries out some sort of chemical process to obtain, which is to get. So obtaining is like you're getting that stuff. And use. So you get the stuff and then you use it. So you get energy and then you use it to survive. Now this looks different for different things. Obviously, we don't get the energy the same way that plants do. We don't use sunlight and soil to live. We have to eat things. We have to eat food. If you're a vegan, you don't eat meat. If you're not a vegan, you eat meat. Either way, we have to consume. That is our obtaining portion in order to use that energy. So one really important thing to think about there is that the food that you eat contains energy that is then broken down inside of your body. So there's chemical processes that go on inside of your body to convert that energy from the food into energy that you will use. So it doesn't look the same, but that food contains energy, and that's in the form of calories. So after the metabolism, we have homeostasis. So the 4th characteristics of living things is homeostasis. So every living organism must maintain a stable internal environment in order to function properly. Now that sounds like a lot of stuff. What it essentially is broken down into is inside of us, we have to be able to maintain balance. So the big description, the big way of thinking of this is your body temperature, you maintain that. So we keep our internal temperature at a certain degree. Now, if it rises too hot, when we get a fever, there is processes that go on in our body to bring us back down. So we'll talk a little bit about how that happens. Not every organism has the same type of homeostasis. They don't undergo it the same way, but every living thing has a way to maintain a stable internal environment. So for example, reptiles don't do that the same way that mammals or humans do. So snakes don't maintain an internal temperature the same as humans do. And then there's also chemical processes that we keep balanced, and we'll go in a little bit more on how all that works. But the bottom line is that all organisms must maintain a stable environment. And then heredity. So heredity is essentially passing on your genes or your traits to your offspring. So this is like if you have brown hair, you're passing on the trait for brown hair to your kids. I have blue eyes, so I pass on the trait of blue eyes to my children. My wife has brown eyes. She will pass on the trait of brown eyes to our children. And that'll get mixed together, and our kids might not have blue, might not have brown, but it'll be a mixture of those traits, and out of there will come our children. It's the heredity. So it gets all mixed together when we reproduce. It just gets jumbled up, and we'll go over how to figure out what the percentages of what your offspring might have. And then there's a cool little picture here. It's heredity, the passing of genetic traits from parents to offspring. So this is why you look like your parents. If you've ever wondered why you look so much like your parents, it's because at a genetic level, you have parts of your parents inside of you. So the sixth part is responsiveness. So all living things must be able to respond to their environment around them. So this means that if something happens to them, they will respond or react to it. So if you are walking through the hallway and someone bumped into you on accident, you are going to respond to that in some way. If someone called your name, you're going to respond to them. You're not just going to ignore them. Now, if we looked at this in the sense of how we do it in our bodies, because this is more talking about how we do it in our bodies, not in our minds. If the weather started to get really cold, like it's about to, and we're going to go outside, as humans, we have a really great way to respond to the environment by putting on more clothes to keep our bodies warm. So we're responding to our environment, and we're also keeping our internal temperature at a good place. So we're doing the homeostasis and we're responding at the same time. Homeostasis for us would do that by itself, but we're helping it along. Now, some other examples with the actual words for what they mean is phototropism. So phototropism is a plant's response to sunlight. So a plant responds to sunlight. If you've ever seen sunflowers, they do it really well because sunflowers will actually follow the sun through the sky. So they'll move throughout the day to follow the sun. This is so that they can get the most sun as possible. And then there's also thigmotropism. Now I know these are big words, but thigmotropism is a response to touch. So some plants, when flies land on them or when you touch them, they will recoil or they'll close. So like a Venus flytrap will respond to when it feels pressure inside of it. This can also be something like if you were to touch a snake and it coils back from you, it's responding to your touch. And then the last characteristic of living things that we're going to talk about is growth and development. So what this means is that all living things will grow and change over time. Develop is another word for change, essentially. And then eventually, after we're done growing and changing and developing, all living things die. We all die. That's where everything is going, is into the ground. There is going to be that time. So a perfect example, if you see the picture on the screen, at the left here, we are starting off as an infant. So as babies, we can't do much. You can't go to the bathroom when you want to. You don't have control over that. You can't eat solid foods. You can't even move, really. You're just laying there. You're at complete control of your parents. Whatever they want to do with you, they're going to do. And then after you're a child, you move to the toddler phase. So in the toddler phase, you start walking around, you start getting teeth, you can start eating food, you start looking different, you start growing up, and then you can start actually using the bathroom when you want to use the bathroom instead of just going randomly. So that is actually a part of growing and developing, is learning how to use the restroom. And then after that, you will go into like the adolescence or the like children. So you all are past this stage. This would be like if you have any elementary siblings or stuff like that, they're growing up. They're starting to get their own personalities. They're starting to grow faster and quicker. They're starting to get stronger. They're starting to figure out their bodies more. And then you'll reach the teenage stage, which is where most of you are. And all of you know that there's a lot of changes going on in your bodies right now. There's so many hormonal changes. There's a lot of physical changes happening. When you start to hit teenage, preteen, and teenagers, this growth and development stage really takes off, and you start to see those changes rapidly. And then finally, we don't have it listed on here, but you would reach adulthood. So when you reach adulthood, you pretty much are fully grown. You're not really going to grow anymore. You could still gain more muscle. You can still work on that thing and grow in that sense. But in the sense of your body maturing and your body functioning in the way that it's supposed to in life, once you reach adulthood, most of your body is set. Your brain's pretty much developed, and you're pretty much good to go for life on the developing totally part. Now, that's different than going and working out a lot or getting fat, either way of the spectrum, whichever one that might end up happening to all of us. That's different than the growth and development. That's something that is happening inside of our bodies. That's not our internal bodies growing and developing still. You can rectify those usually. Everybody has to grow up. Everybody has to get older. That is the growth and development that we're talking about. So it's important to know that those 7 things have to at one point in time be exhibited in an organism for it to be considered alive. Now, the important thing to listen there is one point in time. That means that not all 7 things are going to be existing at once. So, for example, not all plants are getting energy all the time. We aren't getting energy all the time. So I'm not always eating. I'm not always growing. I'm not always keeping my temperature stable, because sometimes it's exactly where I need to be. I am not always reproducing. That's not something that happens all the time. You aren't always having children, or animals aren't always having offspring. Probably the only one that is happening 100% of time inside of every living thing is cellular organization. Because this happens at the cellular level, and every living thing has to have cells, and every living thing never is without cells. So there's always cellular organization in every living thing, because that is a requirement for it to be living, is it has to have cells. So it can never not have cells and be living. Now, those other 6 things, it cannot be doing them, but as long as it does it at some point in life, it is a living thing. All right, so just keep in mind that every living thing has cellular organization. Every living thing has the ability to reproduce. It doesn't mean that they will. Every living thing gets and uses energy, keeps and regulates internal environments. So that's the homeostasis. They pass their genes on to offspring. So this would be the DNA stuff. They respond to their environment, and then they grow and change. So those 7 things right there are the key characteristics to living things. All living things have to have all 7 at one point in time.